Thank you. So welcome. Thank you for having me. Can everybody hear okay in the back? Everybody's okay? Okay, great. So as she was saying, I'm Margaret. I work for Phase 1 and Mamiya Leaf Technical Support. I've been there for about 3 years. And prior to that, I studied photography in college, but I also was a digital tech, lighting assistant for advertising, for whether it was still life, fashion. I also shot a lot of weddings. So I kind of know a bunch of areas of the field. And I think that's great because throughout all of it, Capture One was probably the standard for everything. And it was really excellent. It produces, I think, the best image quality. And I find that it's a standard that you want to get used to. You want to know all the tools, not get overwhelmed, but use what you want to use and do it the best way possible. So I'm going to talk about a few of those today. And at the end, you can also take a look at our Mamiya gear here for medium format. We have a Credo 40, a DF Plus, and an 80mm lens, LS lens. So I want everybody to take advantage and take a look at this equipment and see what medium format has to offer. So just to start out, we called this session Take Back That Flat Image. And that's because a lot of the times when you're shooting, what appears on your LCD and is just not matching when you get it into the software or when you get it home on your computer monitor. And something you thought was very either vivid or sharp or whatever the case may be is no longer as great as you thought it was when you took it. And that's just going to happen. And this software allows you to kind of bring that magic back, that magical experience of doing edits, doing things, and finding that your image is really beautiful and it's very easy to do. We're pretty straightforward in our tools, but I want to show you the differences so you know what you want to use and when to use it and if you don't have to use it. So let's start with the first topic we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the difference between exposure, brightness, and levels. Sometimes people don't understand how these differ and what effect they're having on the image. So we're going to do some comparisons so you can see and when and why you should use levels. And then there's a saturation slider within that tool. We use something called intelligent saturation so that you can have a lot of color separation. The software is kind of aware of what colors need more saturation or don't have enough, and it can kind of decide a little better than just your average software that just kind of adds it blanket and it's usually too much and not very good quality. And then we're going to go to the curves so you can see when you're setting levels, you're using black and white points, and your curves can go very detailed within your midtones. So you can do very, very minor adjustments that make a big difference. We're also going to cover HDR, or high dynamic range tools. It can be a lifesaver in certain circumstances. I find our HDR tool also, when you're bringing back your highlights or recovering your highlights or shadows, is beautifully rendered. I don't have casts, I don't have problems. I can move the slider almost all the way and not have bad results in how the image is rendering. And then we're also going to talk about the differences between contrast and clarity. Clarity uses micro contrast, which is similar to how your lens interprets contrast. So when people are asking how much contrast does this lens have, they're kind of referring to that. And we're going to see the difference and what we can do with those tools. And gray balance or white balance, just how important that is, and color temperature and output for your files and things like that, how to set it. It's very, very simple and a great tool that you need, especially on set, so you can keep up a good color balance and not run into issues later with trying to pull colors out. Intro to Color Editor, it's one of my favorite tools. It's extremely powerful. It's like a selective color tool. So you can actually individually go into these color channels and adjust lightness, saturation, the actual hue. You can change it slightly in the spectrum. You can make your spectrum larger, smaller, change a lot of things up. And then that kind of tool also appears as an option in your local adjustments tool that we have. So you can make layers and use specific tools when you mask out an area. So if you're choosing to mask, just part of a sky or something like that, you can do that and play with coloring, as well as exposure and contrast and so forth. Okay, so let's get started. So for the sake of this presentation, since we're talking about editing for the most part, I'm just going to run through what I did. I created a new session. I took some images that kind of fit the bill for what we're trying to show, and I imported them into this session, and then made what I call variants, or what we call variants. In this case, I want the variants so I can show you comparisons of what I'm doing, before and after, things like that, and make different adjustments and so forth. A variant is not a new file per se. It's not like you're adding an extra raw file. It's a setting that will realize that this one raw file can have multiple image manipulations and be processed differently. So that's kind of nice. It's a cloned variant. So let's get started with this first image. We're going to talk about exposure first. Just want to get this fresh. Okay. So in the exposure tab, which is this that looks kind of like a levels or curves histogram, if you zoom in, you'll see right there, that's your exposure tab. We're going to just look at this exposure slider. And I'm going to bring it up pretty significantly so you can see what it's doing. And it can go very, very far. And your effect on your shadows is not as great as the effect of the midtones and the highlights. And this is kind of per stop. So like stops in your camera, 1, 2, so forth. So you're really bringing it up. And then I'm just hitting Command, or you could even hit Shift if you really wanted to set a compare variant. And we can see both images. So this is the one I just did. Here's the original. And I'm going to compare it to the brightness slider. The brightness slider, in this case, kind of helps because it's bringing up everything. It's not so much highlight and midtone heavy. So you can't go as far, you can't blow things out as easily as you could in the top tool. So it just depends on what you need more of and how you want to use it, but you can use both or use one or the other depending on what works for you. So that's the major difference. I'm just going to go to another fresh image. Just so you know, when you make an edit in Capture One, this little icon appears. That lets you know that you've made adjustments. If you need to reset them, you can do it per tool. I'm just going to pan over. And just hit this little back arrow, and it readjusts per adjustment. I'm just going to go to this file. And we're going to take a look at the saturation I was telling you about earlier. But rather than going to that right away, even though it's in this list, we're just going to look at levels, because I think it relates a lot to exposure, and I think it'd just be easier to go to this point. So we have our black point, our white point, and a midtone slider in between. And if you look, when I scroll over, you can see in the histogram an orange line appearing on the side. That orange line is telling you exactly where you're going to be picking from. So if I move, you can see my histogram doesn't really go into the highlights a lot. It ends kind of short. So I want to now bring my white point in. And when I do that, it makes a good white point. You could bring in the shadows. I mean, in this case, we don't really have to go too far. You're setting your black point, your white point. You can play with the levels. It's kind of an overall, almost like a brightness slider. Again, a little more control, I guess. And then what you can do is now you've remapped the entire curve. Now under here, your curves are ready for you to decide how you're going to manipulate the midtones even in more finer detail. So if we set another variant, this is what we did with our levels. And I'm actually going to copy this just for the sake of the presentation and just apply it so that we have the same adjustments and just show you what happens when I tweak this individually. So what I do is I take this picker right here. I choose a dark point, something white like the snow here. It's pretty high up on the chart. And then a middle gray. So now I can work by pulling this down to just fine-tune each individual midtone that I've selected. Just a little bit. It's not a huge adjustment, but if you really need it and you really want a specific look, this is how you would go for it with the curves. So you can see you can use levels and curves in conjunction. You can choose one or the other. I think levels is great for mapping out your black and white point. We have kind of a rollover effect, which when you're choosing those points and you get to that white point you've chosen, things don't just fall off. The transition with the tones is a lot smoother. So it's like a targeted level program, which is really nice. So then I'm going to go down to this image. And this image was completely overexposed. And it looks as though, you saw this in camera, you most likely would delete it because it just looks like you're not going to get much out of this. Way too much blown out in the sky, in their outfits, in the road, and so forth. So let's say I try, bring my exposure down, but I don't want to go too far because then I'm going to alter too much. It's looking better, but I still have a lot of blown out highlights here. So what we have is something called the High Dynamic Range tool, or HDR. And what you can do with this is recover so much detail without changing your exposure. So already you can see things coming back in the shirt. Compare it to this image, and look how far we've come. Again, I'm out at 100%. Look at the differences. It's like night and day, and I haven't compromised any of the image quality. I don't have odd casts. They're not filling it in with weird colors. And you can see I have so much more detail in here. Even if I go all the way with this slider, I have almost like a shoulder here, everything. So that's a great example, so you don't feel like you need to just toss everything. If you work in RAW, that is the best way. It has all this material in the file that you can't see. And if you work in JPEG, it's a compressed file. So all the information is now compressed, and it's not going to be able to use the tools to recover information it's simply not there at that point. It's been compressed. So if you look at this JPEG, when I try using recovery, all it does is kind of fill it in with, I guess, gray, or makes it darker in the highlights and brighter in the shadows. Not much can be done. At that point, you would have to get rid of this image because you wouldn't be able to edit it. So it's always best to work in RAW if possible. It takes up a little more space, but the best way to use tools and bring back information and save a photo. What if it's like a once-in-a-lifetime type of thing? If you're at a wedding and they're just about to exchange vows and rings and you miss it and you have a file like this, at least if it's in RAW, you have a chance to bring it back and save a moment that you could have lost. So let's go to the next tool I want to talk about is the clarity tool directly underneath over here. And I'm just going to zoom in so we can see a little clearer. We have three options: classic, neutral, and punch. I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between neutral and punch first. I'm going to select neutral, and you'll see there's two options, clarity and structure as well. Zoom back out. I'm going to use this image as an example. And on the right-hand side, this is going to be the original. On the right-hand side is what we're going to alter with clarity. And I just want you to notice, even at this distance, the changes with the clarity slider. Zoom in. You can already kind of see it. You can see much crisper edges. It's a little zoomed out. Just a sharper, almost like a sharper photograph in a way, but not over sharpened, not a fake sharpening, almost like what your lens could produce. So I'm going to zoom back out and just notice also that the right-hand side's a bit punchier. We call it punch for a reason. It's adding a bit of saturation for you. So you can choose to not do that. You can go to neutral. I'm just going to zoom in. And in neutral, having the same effect, but the colors haven't really changed. Oh, I moved my structure slider by accident. And what I wanted to talk to you about structure was, maybe on skin, structure would look a bit over-sharpened. Unless you're dealing with an image that's only meant to be seen on the web, you can apply this, and it really makes things look tack sharp at a considerable distance. Not maybe when you're printing, it probably wouldn't translate very well. But structure is very good in situations like this because there's no skin. It's just dealing with the geometric shapes and adding a little bit more. So you can see from our original to here, we have a much almost contrastier image based on the micro contrast and the clarity tool. So if we take that as opposed to this original image, let's use the contrast slider, which I wanted to get back to. You see immediately your shadows go too dark and your highlights can blow out as well. You can use it, I think, minimally most of the time, or if it suits you well in the type of exposure you've taken. But in a lot of cases, that's going to happen as opposed to keeping it clean individually. So you look closely, see the differences in the shadows in the lake. So, and then our saturation tool, which I'll just compare. Let's use two new. Original on the left, edit on the right. It's quite nice. You can really get those greens to pop. And they don't look, I don't feel they look particularly fake or anything. It just looks like a better lighting scenario. Nicer saturation, sun shining, that sort of feel. And the blue in the sky reflected in the lake is there. It's quite nice. So it's another slider that works intelligently that you can use in your workflow safely without making your image look, I don't know, I guess I'll use the term overcooked in a way, like you did too much adjusting to it. So that's the tools in the exposure tab I'd like to cover today. And you're going to see as I go through on the next adjustments that you can go back and use these tools again. So in like a studio situation, you're probably going to gray balance. It doesn't have to be the studio, but most likely you're going to do this because your white balance is totally off. I shot this with a modeling bulb. You could see some fluorescence above mirror reflecting in the actual plexi. And I just want to show you how to properly white balance and how much is going to change the image. So what you do is go to the white balance tool and you'll see the gray tab. Just going to zoom in. Right now its mode is as shot. It's just going to default to that. So whatever you shot it at, like I shot it with this terrible like modeling bulb effect. And you see your Kelvin and tints. The Kelvin is your color temperature. And then the tint, you can kind of arrange your greens and magentas and alter it slightly should you need to after you pick it. But the software is going to be very aware of what you're going for and say, okay, this middle gray, I just used the picker, this middle gray is what I want to base all the colors off of. Correct this to be balanced, almost like daylight balance, and it will correct everything around it. So now you have a much better balance in terms of colors, and you can adjust it further. And to be honest, some of these, when you go into the modes, you have some automatic modes. If I hit tungsten, because my modeling bulb was tungsten, it actually corrects quite nicely. So let me just reset this with our back arrow right here to the original. And I'm just going to hit tungsten. It's done a pretty good job of balancing out the tungsten light and giving you a neutral gray. So that's great. You should do that. If you could shoot a card like this or even a color checker that has the middle gray in it, it's probably the best way to go wherever you go, so that each maybe session or each shot, however you're doing it, has a color balance option for you to use. and you can copy and apply it to every image to come, even while you're shooting. If you're shooting tethered, it will remember if you copy that adjustment and say to use the last adjustment you made on the following photos. So that's a good thing to have. And then I'm going to look at our color editor a little bit. I'm not going to use this to start. Those are the charts I was talking about, though. So you would choose, a middle gray right in here to balance, to white balance. I'm going to take a look. Okay. Well, I can use this image for this as well. There's something a little more basic I wanted to use, but we can use it here as well. So let's say this is a detail of someone's wedding dress. Somebody hand embroidered it. Bring my exposure down a little bit, just for starters. Use my high dynamic range, get a little more detail in there. Go back to my color tab up top, the 3 circles here. And in the basic color editor, we have 3 tabs: basic, advanced, and skin tone. We're going to cover all 3, but let's start with basic so you can see what's going on. I'm just going to select this kind of orange color. And what you see here is the point is selected over in the color wheel. This wheel can move. You can change your range in terms of how it's going to spread out and affect the colors in terms of saturation, the U rotation, lightness, things like that. The smoothness is almost like a feathering. So if you look, the lines in between become a little more spread out. And it, similar to feathering, it kind of blends better. So if you switch the U on this, I can make it a cooler U or an even brighter U if you want to. So let's say I just want to change it a little bit, but I'm really concentrating on saturation. I don't want to oversaturate everything in the image. I only want that color. So now I can add the saturation. Let's just compare to the original real quick. You see a great difference. We used our HDR tool, we used our exposure tool, and we've literally changed the embroidery here. So if you want to make something kind of stand out, this was kind of a basic shot, you can do this. Maybe you don't want to change the U so much, but you just want it to pop a little bit and make note of it, because someone hand embroidered this for this bride. So it's important to her. It'll translate real well in print. So we've done that. So that's kind of the basic tab, and that helps in situations like this, something pretty basic and pretty straightforward. It's not really going to affect anything else but maybe some of these other tones that I picked. And it's pretty safe bet. But then what if we want to go, just find, into an image. Let's go back to our first image here. Or no, we could use this one as well. This may be a better example. Sorry, just going to bring up, use this tool a little bit, exposure like we were discussing before. If I'm worried about shadows, I can move the shadow slider as well. Opens those shadows up, and you can see it compared to this image, what's happening there. So I'm going to work on this image a little bit, and I'm going to go into the Advanced tab of Color Editor that we were just talking about, right here. Again, there's a color picker. And you're going to see a huge difference from Advanced to Basic when I select, let's say, this blue. The spectrum is a lot smaller, so it's just focusing, it's even more detailed on this specific blue, so that you're not altering every part of the blue channel, but just this small part. Almost like your curves, you're being very selective with the tone. Again, you can alter smoothness, things like that. U rotation, you see I've turned it more magenta, purple, and this would be greener. You can bring up saturation. And you'll notice it doesn't really affect every blue tone. It's not affecting every one in the sky, just kind of selecting that water one. just to bring that up a little more advanced than the basic tab in case you're worried about very, very specific tones. And then you can actually lighten it if you'd like also. I'm just going to do something dramatic so you can see the differences. Below, you'll see the two options here. Shows you a before and after. So before the color was like this, now the color is selected, I've changed to this. Also, if you want to look at the color picker, what you've selected, and not see any other color, you'll notice that it does pick up some of the sky and the water, but you're eliminating the greens and everything else that might make it hard for you to see exactly where you're affecting your colors selectively. You can also see that there's an adjustment here now. If you toggle this, it's also a before and after. So you have multiple options on each channel. Let's say you make another selection in your greens. Now you have a second, almost like a layer here as well, that you can alter. You can bring them down, do whatever you like to them. Things like that. And then we have this skin tone option. And this is really great. It's a lot like the advanced tab. It will work pretty great on this subject is a good person to go off of. We'll set a compare. Just want to zoom in on his face a little bit. I just want you to notice that we have some uneven skin tone here. We have a lot of red going into what would be kind of his overall average skin tone. And what you'll notice in this tab is the uniformity slider. Advanced has no uniformity, skin tone has uniformity. Purpose being that we're going to see that we don't only correct the skin tone the way we'd like, let's say we want to just pull red out in general, but we're also going to be able to smooth it out and transition some of the red to beige ratio. Kind of smooth it out a little before you go in and really have to retouch if necessary. So I use this hand tool a lot. I just want to make sure everybody knows if you click on this hand tool and double click, it brings you to 100% in the image, wherever the hand is located. So it's a great tool. And then you double click again, I'm back out to the fit to image. So I take this picker and I'm going to select, you know, kind of what looks like a normal area of skin tone. And I'm just going to move my U rotation a little bit. And at the same time, I want to show you the original. So it's kind of hard to see, but it is there. We want you to be able to do things in a very minor fashion that make a big difference later. So you don't end up just making adjustments, not knowing how they're affecting your image, and then being upset with the outcome. We want you to do things in a very minor way, which will end up making a huge difference. So already I can tell it's kind of, you know, his tone's a little bit different, might be better. I'm just going to go over here and go to this uniformity slider. And you'll notice now it's a little bit more, less of a steep transition. It's going to require more work, but, and of course I made his skin very, very yellow for the purpose of presentation, but you notice there's less of a drop-off from here to there. On the forehead, definitely you notice it looks just more like shadow and not so red. And it's just a little bit better. It helps you out a lot. And then if you have to go back in and do a couple of things, you can mask these areas. We'll talk about local adjustments and really pull out even more of the red to make it transition better. So it's really, it's such a beneficial tool. It seems very complex, but it's not. You use it to your, the best of your ability and what you need and how it alters. And you'll see that here, like even in U rotation, we don't let you go more than 5 points. So we're not going to let you turn somebody's skin to a ridiculous tone just for, by accident or you don't understand. We're kind of controlling what you're doing a little bit and knowing what the photographer wants. Not just throwing tools at you and telling you, okay, figure it out. We kind of know what you're going for and where your limits should be. So, with that said, I'm going to take a look at this layer adjustment tool. It's this little paintbrush here. And it's local adjustments. but you work within layers just like many other programs. And you'll see here I've left our exposure and color editor. There's a couple more that you can use and edit. Not every tool can be used on a local adjustment, but the ones that can have this little paintbrush next to them and are usually by default found in this tab. Your layout is also very customizable, which seems like a lot to deal with, but it's really not. You get to decide how you want to view your tools, what you want to put on here. For instance, here, I'm just going to use this image to show you. That's my highlight warning. So I've gone either at 255 on my white or past it, because I've set a highlight warning. So I can see that obviously this is overexposed and I have to do something about it so it doesn't print paper white. So okay, so the first thing on here, I think this is probably the best way to do this, is with this couple, they have very different skin tones. But for whatever reason, his appears a little bit too magenta, according to how this is balanced from the camera, because it's as shot. I don't want to mess with the white balance too much. I like the blues in the background, but they're both a little cool. He's definitely turning a bit more magenta. So what I can do from the start, if you just, we don't want to go too much into detail because adjustment layers are a lesson themselves that we can address at another time. But just so you kind of are familiar, just to do a simple adjustment, you can select your brush tool here. I keep my mask on just when I'm drawing it, as opposed to keeping it on all the time. If you keep it on all the time and then you go to make an adjustment, you're not going to see it because the mask is a red mask to show you exactly what you've selected. You can obviously erase. There's also a gradient mask, which we won't get into, but helps in large areas to set like almost like an auto mask in a way. And then these two double arrows allow you to set size of your brush, how sharp the mask is going to be. If you have a geometrical shape and you want it to be just so, you're going to make the brush very hard. On skin like this, I want it to blend a little better, so I'm going to make it a soft edge. And opacity if you choose to work at like a 50% or something to see things happen gradually. Auto mask can kind of detect, and it does, I think it does a pretty good job of what you're selecting, and know, okay, maybe I don't want that hair selected. Like if I go and mask his face, it knows the tone of the hair. Maybe I don't want that selected. It kind of can try to figure out what you're going for. So it's a good feature. You don't have to use it. You can just draw your own mask and work that way. So what I want you to notice is right now we're on the background layer. Everybody's familiar with that. And what's going to happen is the software will automatically choose a new layer as soon as you start drawing this mask. So I just want to zoom in. Select my brush again. It's obviously too large. Let's just draw a quick mask over his face. When I release, the mask goes away. You can hit the M button on your keyboard to show you the mask again. If you want a shortcut. And you'll see right here, layer 1 has been created automatically for you because you started drawing a mask. You can also add them here any way you want and subtract them with this plus and minus. So now he's selected, we're in the layer, everything's good to go. We're on a tool that can be adjusted. And if you want to brighten him up, you can. Just his face. You can work with your exposure, contrast, even your mid-tone area with the brightness, saturation, and so forth. But I really want to kind of look at his skin tone and just change it a little bit so they kind of flow together better and it's not so magenta. So I go back to the same tool, the color editor tool, hit this color picker selection again, and I'm just going to choose a good area of skin tone I think would work for him. So here it looks a little less magenta. And I'm just going to adjust the U. And in order to see that better, I'll bring up the original. And you can see already there's been multiple changes. If I go this way, he turns even more red. If I go this way, we're kind of getting a warmer feel instead of a cooler. He's starting to match a little bit. That's nice. Maybe I can play with the uniformity also. So it kind of applies it to other areas with that tone and gives him less blotchy, or he doesn't really have blotchy skin, but if he did, it would certainly help in that case. And you can see there's a dramatic difference now between his skin tone in the original and in the final product here. We back out. And you can see it just looks like a better combination in comparison to the cool background, and works pretty well. Also, when you're in this tool, let's say you select a color again, you can expand the range by hitting this little icon here. So you have some options there. Let's see if we missed anything else. I think you can do the inverse of your selection in your advanced tab. So if I choose the blue in his jeans, it will adjust everything but that blue. Oh, I'm on the layer, sorry. So you can see it's changing. Oh, it didn't. Okay. Sorry about that. So this is changing everything else but the blue I've selected in his jeans. You have to have this invert selection on. So if you're really interested in changing every tone but one, you can do that and just leave his jeans alone in this particular case. So does that make sense how you flow these tools together? I've put them in order for the sake of our presentation. You can move them yourself. But just so you get an idea, you can move them anywhere you want. I put them in order. I'm holding down Command on a Mac and dragging it. I have my highlight warnings, things like that, and so forth. So does that seem to make sense and flow well? If you would start with your exposure, contrast, things like that to get a good image. Your white balance is also very important because your color can change based on exposure. So you want to look at that first, and then go on to define more color and deal with selectively choosing different things, whether it's exposure, curves, different colors, masking, whatever you'd like to pick. Feel free to come up here and play with the camera a little bit. This medium format camera, I want everybody to take a look at it and just shoot with it and see what it can do. So in case you're looking to go this direction, you have an idea of how it feels, how heavy it is, things like that. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.